Welcome in episode 35 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. This is episode number 12 of season 2, and I'll be joined by my buddy, Craig Klement. We'll discuss strategies for spicing up standardized test review, Google My Maps choice boards, Google Tour Builder, digital badging, some Google Forms and Google Sheets add-ons and formulas and hacks, as well as some ways to help teachers work smarter, not harder. Here we go!
I'm Stacey Lindis from Podcast PD, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Hello, Duct Tapers. Welcome back. My name is Jake, and I am here to talk to you about duct tape and educational technology and a mindset that I think can help you with EdTech integration in your classroom. I want to start off by thanking everyone for their excitement about our most recent full-length episode, which featured Jared, Cooney, Horvath. First off, I finally heard back from Jared just after that podcast aired, and he apologized for not getting back to me. He was on a little bit of a vacation with the family, I believe, and he is 100% okay. He has not been directly affected by the fires in Australia, but again, we're sending our positive thoughts to those people who have. In terms of the episode itself, I heard back from many people who took lots of new perspectives and ideas back to their classrooms, as well as some who jumped right onto Amazon to grab Jared's book, and that's just so awesome. As you probably already know, we reflect on each full-length episode in a Twitter chat a week later. The schedule for those chats, by the way, is linked in the show notes. The chat about episode 34, the episode with Jared on it, was a fun one as it combined excitement over some new strategies and also some cognitive dissonance about some of the things that we discussed, some of our beliefs and things we thought we knew or do know or whatever, thought we understood maybe, were questioned and we're thinking things through and discussing them. There was lots of interest in the discussion on live or closed captioning, so I'm going to include some links in the show notes for those of you who may want more info on either side of the issue, either some references that Jared used or some things that some people have provided me about the use of live captioning or closed captioning for all students. Before we get to today's new content, as always, I'd like to share my calendar of upcoming speaking events. I'll be doing a full-day Flipgrid workshop at Kent State University on February 7th. The following week, I'll be doing 3 sessions at OETC in Columbus, then a full day of sessions at Revere Schools here in Ohio. In March, I'll be doing one of the keynotes and a few breakout sessions at Kentucky's KISTE conference. In May, I'll be in Alabama for Tech Meet Tuscaloosa. You may have noticed I completely skipped April there. That's because my schedule, my calendar is clear. So call me up, guys. On that note, by the way, I finally, it took me forever to finally get around to doing this, finally made a speaking video combining some highlights from a whole bunch of different events that I have video recordings of from the past year or two, and it is up on my YouTube channel. So if you are interested in potentially having me come to an event that you're hosting or your school or something like that, check out my YouTube channel, and there's a video there that you can see. If you can't find it, just reach out to me on Twitter or send me an email or something like that. Anyhow, where was I? In May, did I say May already? Anyhow, in May, I'll be in Alabama for Tech Meet Tuscaloosa. In June, I'll be at WITCON in Galesburg, Illinois. And then I think, maybe, I'll be at ISTE in Anaheim, California. To be honest, I actually have not decided for sure if I'm going to do ISTE. The one thing, however, that would make it hard for me to say no to going to ISTE would be if my educational duct tape panel is voted in as a People's Choice session. The session idea is to have a handful of past and upcoming guests with me to answer teacher questions from the audience, just like the ones that we do here on the podcast. I think that sounds like a lot of fun, and I think a lot of opportunities for learning in that as well. So I reached out to all of the past and upcoming show guests and can share with you a list of 6 guests who said that they definitely like to be part of the panel. They know they're going to be in California for ISTE. They know that if they're available to be sitting at that table, they will do it. And those 6 people are Jen Giffen, Marcia Kish, upcoming guest Dr. Sarah Thomas, John Carippo, Sean Fahey, and another upcoming guest, Brian Romero-Smith. How awesome does that sound? I'm so honored that these 6 rock stars would be willing to share a stage with me. On top of that, a handful of other guests would like to do it if they can. They weren't sure, maybe they won't be at ISTE, or maybe they might have a conflicting event or something like that, but they'll be there. I don't know. Some people we weren't quite sure just yet. So they're not able to be listed here for sure, but I think that by the time ISTE comes around, I'm pretty confident that I'll be listing more than those 6 past EDU duct tape guests that I just listed now. It'll probably be a larger number than 6, and that's just... I geek out about that idea. So hopefully that session does get voted in. If you agree that this sounds like a fun idea with lots of learning potential, there is a link in the show notes for you to vote for it. But hurry, voting closes on January 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is coming up pretty darn soon after this episode launches. So get on there and do that. One other thing to add to your calendar, on February 5th from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll be moderating the hashtag Kids Deserve It Twitter chat. We're going to look at some of the ideas that Adam Welcome and Todd Neslony shared in the Kids Deserve It book from an educational duct tape mindset. I hope that you guys will join me. Finally, don't forget that after you listen to today's episode, you can head over to eduducttape.com/certificate to claim your certificate of listening, laughing, and learning in hopes of getting some PD credit for your time. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. I've been volunteering to work with a group of kids in my son's 4th grade class lately. My son and a group of his classmates are participating in a 24 competition. 24 is a math game that I used to play with my middle school math students. Anyhow, since I knew the game from my days in the middle school math classroom, his teacher invited me to come in and help them prepare for the competition. It's been so much fun. It's been a blast. I love working with 4th grade. It's one of my favorite age groups, and math is one of my favorite subjects, so it's just been a lot of fun. During my visits, I've been marveling at these 4th graders' math brains. Their strategies for attacking problems are just fascinating, how different kids come up with different ways to attack these different problems. It's been really cool. I've been kind of geeking out about it. But it got me thinking about how I became a math teacher. When I was actually a 4th grader, roughly, math came pretty easy to me. And I likely would have enjoyed a competition like 24. I don't know if it existed at the time. If it was, I didn't know about it. But I would have enjoyed it because math came easy to me. But I think I first got really excited about math when I took algebra. It was the first time that I really had to work at it. Like, I really had to work to get the math. Like, there was some struggle. And that struggle, that challenge, really added to the fun. I enjoyed it so much that when my algebra teacher offered up an elective math course a year or two later, I jumped at the opportunity to take it. Not only did I think she was an awesome math teacher, but I was just so excited about math and I wanted to learn more of it. I wanted to challenge myself further because I knew that challenge was what made it truly exciting for me. Anyhow, after a while, that teacher presented the students in that class with an opportunity. She asked us if we would visit our elementary school a few times a week to tutor some students who were struggling with math. So I did it, and I loved that experience. I knew pretty quickly thereafter that I would love to be a teacher someday. And so after taking a brief detour into mechanical engineering, I became a math teacher. And this evolution of my connection with math and teaching is a great example of the adjacent possible. Season 1 listeners will certainly remember the adjacent possible. This is an example of it because my enjoyment of algebra opened me up to the possibility of taking an elective course. My participation in that course opened me up to being invited to taking part in some tutoring. That tutoring experience opened me up to the possibility of becoming an educator. And my work with that teacher, being in that teacher's class and taking that teacher's elective course, opened me up to all of these possibilities of this tutoring. So these activities I participated in and this educator that I connected myself with opened me up to new possibilities. They became available to me that weren't there before. My background as a math teacher opened me up to the possibility of helping out in my son's classroom. Had I not been a math teacher before, the teacher of my son's class probably would not have reached out to me and invited me in for this. Oftentimes, the adjacent possible plays a huge role in how we grow as humans and as educators. The adjacent possible, the idea that what's possible is always being expanded by what we expose ourselves to. By what and who we expose our ideas to, by what ideas and experiences we expose ourselves to, and by what is adjacent to us, just out of reach. It can be a major catalyst of growth. So, how are you letting adjacent possible into your practice as an educator? Well, that's easy. You're listening to this podcast, right? That's an example of the adjacent possible. You're exposing yourself to the ideas that I'm sharing and that Craig is going to share in a little bit, right? So I guess I don't need to ask you, but maybe you need to ask your colleagues. How are you, dear colleague, letting the adjacent possible influence your practice as an educator? It's a multiple choice question with lots of correct answers. I hate when I hear people say that all teachers should be on Twitter. No, all teachers should not be on Twitter. Like, I've met lots of teachers in my time working in schools and being an educator and being a student and being a speaker and all of these different things. I've met lots of educators who would hate Twitter. Like it would just overwhelm them. They would not enjoy that. It's not for everybody, but there is something for everybody. There is an adjacent possible out there for all educators, and they can all grow through it. It is a multiple choice question with lots of correct answers. Podcasts, Twitter chats, Instagram, Voxer, Facebook groups, the staff workroom, conferences, unconferences, ed camps, hallway discussions, books, blogs, observing colleagues teach, welcoming in observers, co-teaching, working with an instructional coach, blogging about your experiences, hosting your own podcast, and so much more. Like, this list can go on forever. The adjacent possible will be there in all of those settings. The only thing that you could do to cut off the adjacent possible is to close all of the doors, to close all of the adjacent possibilities off from yourself. And who would want that? Certainly not your students, certainly not their parents. Open yourself up to the possibilities that the adjacent possible can offer to you. Find a way that's comfortable for you to be exposed to that adjacent possible and go for it. Maybe a little bit of discomfort. You don't have to go crazy with it. Maybe a little bit of discomfort to push you forward. But the adjacent possible has so much to offer you. What are you going to do? What are your colleagues going to do? What are your students going to do? There are surprises in store and growth available that you'll never know about without the adjacent possible. We've got to go for it. We've got to open ourselves up to those possibilities.
Today's guest.
All right, today our guest is Craig Klement. Craig is the RTI facilitator at Garland High School in Garland, Texas. He is a Google certified trainer and former math teacher and ed tech coach. Craig is a proud father of 3 wonderful kids and another kid. He enjoys spending time with his family, playing board games and Legos, reading and playing or watching sports, including being an amateur softball coach for his daughter's team. You can reach out to Craig on Twitter at Craig Klement and check out his blog at craigklement.wordpress.com. His email address is also in the show notes if you need to reach out to him. How you doing, Craig? Welcome in.
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've got to ask you a question on your bio. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Please do.
So as I was reading it, like the part where it says, Craig is a proud father of 3 wonderful kids, ... and another kid. Does that mean that you have 4 kids and one of them's not wonderful? Or does that mean that you are the 4th kid?
No, so I do have 4 kids and they are all wonderful. But anytime I'm presenting, I'll put up a picture of my whole family and I always say, I've got 3 wonderful kids, and you can just see everyone in the audience like counting, like, no, there's 4 kids
there's 4 up there.
That's a little joke.
And another kid.
So I've got 3 daughters and a son. But no, they're all wonderful and a lot of fun.
Do you rotate which one is the not wonderful kid every time?
Definitely.
You point to one kid. You point to like your youngest daughter. She's looking there all sweet, and everybody's like, "Oh gosh, she looks wonderful."
Yep, I like to mix it up, and it always starts the presentations off with a good laugh, and so I like to do that.
That's nice. I like it. Great. So Garland, Texas. So what area of Texas is that?
That is in the Dallas area. It's on the east side of Dallas.
Nice. So Craig, I think the way I first became aware of your work and connected with you was actually probably through a Ditch Book chat. And then I think we met last year at ISTE, right?
Yes, sir.
I remember we were like clogging up the hallway in the convention center, me and you and Sean Fahey and
then I think Lance McLaren.
And Lance McLaren. Yeah, we were all standing there and people were like having to weave around us as we have this little like, oh, Twitter buddies, like chat in the middle of this hallway. Yep. We didn't care. We were in the zone enjoying meeting each other, right?
Yep. It was fun meeting. So that was my first like conference really out of state. I got to meet a whole lot of people that trip. So that was a good trip.
Oh yeah, that was my first ISTE as well. It was a blast. Like what an experience. And it really was just all about like meeting people and connecting with people and talking about stuff. And we are all such nerds that as we start talking, we're not like talking about like football or going out for beers. We're talking about like educational stuff and educational technology. What a bunch of geeks.
Yep.
So now that I've called ourselves geeks, we're gonna start off with a game. You ready for a game?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna play a game of 2 truths and 1 lie.
2 truths and 1 lie.
So, Craig, I know you've listened to this show before, so I know you know how this is going to go. You're going to give me 3 statements. I am going to do a horrible job of guessing which one's the lie, and then I'm going to get confused about whether or not I've ever identified the lie, and you're going to have to correct me and remind me how to play this game that I play on my show. Does that sound good?
Yes, sir. Sounds good.
Okay, go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, so first statement. In my high school geometry class, I once told a student to go stand in the corner.
Okay.
Second statement. I once taught a math lesson using yellow snow.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
And the third statement, at a high school that I taught at in Louisiana, a student gave me the nickname Clem Shady.
Clem Shady. I fully believe that one is true because I also, like, you've been teaching long enough to be teaching during the years when Slim Shady, Eminem, was cool. I was actually nicknamed Eminem by some of my students for a while because I was Mr. Miller. So the kids named me Eminem.
Nice.
They did not name me Eminem because of my skills on the mic. I cannot flow on the microphone, as like I can barely even host a podcast, worse yet rap. So I believe the Clem Shady. And I think that the high school geometry story of telling a kid to stand in the corner is one of your deep, dark secrets of your past as an educator, one of the skeletons in your closet that you're embarrassed about. So I think that one is true. So I think the yellow snow is a lie. That
is correct. The yellow snow is a lie.
Yes. Okay. So tell us about the geometry student first.
Okay. So in my room, it was either really cold or really hot, just depending on the day. Well, on this one particular day, it was freezing in the classroom, and the student said that they were cold. So I told them to go stand in the corner because everyone knows that it's warmer in the corner. So this girl, she looked at me funny. Well, anyways, in the middle of the lesson, I'm up at the front of the class. She stands up and walks to the front of the room and stands in the corner during the lesson. And I let a minute or two go by and ask her, "Does it feel warmer over there?" And she goes, "Actually, it does." And I said, "Does it feel about 90 degrees?" She did not get it. The entire class is laughing. She just stands there. About another 30 seconds to a minute go by, and she realizes what just happened. And then she puts her head down and does a walk of shame back to her desk.
The geometry teacher with the right angle burn. I like it.
Yeah.
So I at first I thought you were going to say you were embarrassed that the kid was bad and you made them stand in the corner, but I think you should be more embarrassed for that bad teacher joke right there.
Well, my philosophy is if I got to have fun, so that way the kids are having fun, and so I always like to pick on the kids any way I could.
I like it. So how did you feel when you were Clem Shady? How did you feel about that nickname?
Well, so it was funny. So a lot of the kids called me coach, even though I never really coached anything. And one of the high school basketball players in the middle of class just shouted out, "Why do we call you coach?" And I said, "You know what? I don't know. People just call me coach." And so he goes, "Well, I'm going to come up with a nickname for you." So this is in Louisiana. So I'm, the demographic there. And I've got, I'm a white teacher, kind of look like Eminem a little bit. And so this guy, instead of calling me Slim Shady, like you said, he started calling me Clem Shady. Nice. And it stuck, and the entire class started calling me Clem Shady the rest of the year, and I didn't have a problem with it.
Did you tell them that you were Clem Shady, the real Clem Shady, and all the other Clem Shadys should stop imitating?
Yes.
Yes, you did. Okay, good.
And for dinner, it's mom's spaghetti.
Right. Oh no, that's bad. That's a bad one because that comes back up.
Yep.
So you said Louisiana. So are you originally from Louisiana, or are you really from Texas, or what's that story?
No, so I grew up in the Texas area, in the Dallas area, and then went to Louisiana for college, and then got hired at the school that I student taught at. So taught there for 6 years before moving back to Texas, and so this is my 6th year teaching in Texas. Working.
Oh, so was college LSU?
No, it was a small school, McNeese State University in Lake Charles.
I've heard of McNeese State. I don't know if maybe it's from football. Maybe one of the local teams around here played against McNeese or something like that.
Yeah, they might have.
Yeah, interesting. I'm glad you're not from LSU because I'm an Ohio State fan.
Yeah.
I'm actually wearing a Ohio State Buckeye shirt right now, and so I'm ramping up my like the rivalry with LSU just in case we're recording this before the national championship happens. So just in case we end up facing LSU, so I want to make sure that you and I were on good terms. So
yes, we're on good terms.
We're on good terms then. Good. Okay. Okay, so we're going to jump into some educational duct tape now. And for those listeners out there that might be totally new to the show, welcome in, first of all. But let me tell you what educational duct tape is. It's my silly metaphor that educational technology is at its best when it's not the goal of a lesson or activity, but when it's a tool being used to solve a goal or meet or solve a problem, solve a goal. Goodness, Jake, to solve a problem or meet a goal or address a learning standard you might have in the classroom. Much like duct tape, using it is never our goal, but it's a extremely valuable tool to help us solve other problems. So that's educational duct tape. So I'm going to ask you a question that a teacher might have, and we're going to use educational technology as a solution for that question. Does that sound good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this question actually came from a tweet. I saw Kristen Merrill tweet at some point in the past. I'll try to link it in the show notes if I can find it. It was quite a while ago that I saw her tweet it, and I was like, oh, that's a good question to ask on the show. And it was, how do we spice up preparation for standardized tests? So when she asked the question, Kristen kind of was admitting maybe this shouldn't be something we're focusing on, but it is something that we feel that we need to focus on. So how can we take the pain out of this standardized test prep and make it a little more fun or a little more engaging or a little more valuable to the students rather than just trudging through the content to prepare for this test? How can we make it how can we spice it up, like she said? So what's your suggestion there?
Yeah, well, so first off, growing up, I always went through practice tests and test packets, and that can be valuable, but those just aren't engaging. They're not fun. So we do have to spice it up. And so I actually had the privilege. So I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I was charged with helping. So the big push, is college, career, military readiness. And so I was charged with helping a group of 100 seniors that were deemed not college career ready because they had failed the TSI-A test,
okay,
or the AccuPlacer test. And so I was supposed to help them, do some remediation intervention, and we were going to pay for them to take the test again. And so I was going to have to come up with a way to help prepare them for this standardized test. This had math from 8th grade to geometry to statistics. So there was just way too much material to cover. So one of the first things I did was I created a learning menu or a choice board using Google My Maps. And so I called it taking a road trip on Google My Maps.
Okay.
So each of those areas, like statistics, I assigned a color. Geometry, I gave a different color. Algebra, I gave a different color. And so I told the students, take a road trip from the East Coast to West Coast or West to East and make a couple stops at each of the different colors.
Okay.
So they had their kind of choice of what to do there. But then they were also each given data from their first time that they took the test. And so they knew what area they scored the weakest in. So I let them, so I told them, I was like, so focus on, so geometry was your lowest area. So once you hit the other ones too, but I really want you to focus on the red because that was geometry.
Okay.
And so I told them because this was a group of seniors that didn't have to take this test to graduate, that graduation was in a month away and they were already there. The school was just trying to get them college career ready. So we were trying to save them some money of not having to take remediation classes in college. So I had to try and do something fun and engaging that would get a group of seniors that didn't have to do this test to graduate, want to do this test and want to do it well.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that it worked. I had over 70% of the kids pass the test after some of these remediation things that I did.
That's awesome. So I like the fact that, number one, you're building in choice. And number two, you're making it kind of fun. So choice boards was kind of part of the way that I was going to solve it, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I love the idea of a Google My Maps choice board. So did you just pick kind of like arbitrary spots as you moved across the country and just link in a question there? Is that how you did that?
Yes. So I just chose different cities all across the country. And then I inserted different types of activities. So one stop might have been a Desmos activity. A different stop might have just been a practice question or a Khan Academy video. So I try to do different types of activities throughout the choice board. And then I also even included like a brain break video in the Midwest or like central United States.
Mm-hmm.
So of some of my favorite different math videos, whether it was like a little kid snippet, funny video or a TED talk about math. So just so that way they could have a brain break in the middle of the activity.
Oh, it's a really cool way to. I've never heard of anybody doing that with a choice board to put it on a map as they move across the country. It'd be really cool, like in a social studies class or something like that, to do it as it relates to like a certain region you're studying or something like that.
Yep.
They put in different choices there, whether it's choices that relate to that specific area on the map, or if it's just like you're doing it, where it's like a path that they're taking to get from point A to point B, and they have all these stops to take in the middle. Yeah, it's really neat.
And so another thing I did to make it fun, just since it was a group of seniors, was I told them, no road trip is good unless you have music and food. So I told them, I was like, you can bring, snacks and drinks in class, which they were all excited about. And then I encouraged headphones too, so they could listen to music while they were working. And then they had the choice if they were doing this road trip solo, so either by themselves, or they could carpool and work with some other people too.
Nice. That's really cool. That's a cool activity. So you said then the stuff that you were using then were, you said Khan Academy videos, Desmos, and so the practice problems, were they just like a Google Doc that they typed an answer into or something like that?
It was just a picture of a practice problem, and I just inserted the image.
Neat. That's a really cool way to lay that out. I really like the idea of putting it on My Maps. Any reason that you did My Maps and not Tour Builder? Was it just before Tour Builder came out, or why did you make that choice?
So that was based off the Google Teacher Tribe podcast, and Matt and Casey were doing an episode on Google My Maps.
Okay. So
I threw out the idea to them of using it as a choice board. And then Casey sent it back to me and said, okay, that's great. Go do it. And then so whenever I was presented with this opportunity to work with these students, that was one of my first thoughts, was trying to do this choice board.
Yeah, that's really cool. So for those people not listening, and you can correct me if I get into this wrong here, because I get the Google Geo tools mixed up. So My Maps is essentially Google Maps, except you are marking certain points on the map, almost like for your own use. And you can add content along with it. And then you could share it with other people if you want to. So there's no like order of the things that are on the map, right? It's really just a map with a bunch of points selected. So you had to tell the kids, if there was an order, you had to tell them what order to go through them in, right?
Correct. And you can change the markers. Like if you wanted to go them through a certain order, you can number the markers that way. But you create the Google My Maps right from your Google Drive. Mm-hmm. And then I shared it out as a view only, so that way the class or all the students could access the document without making any edits to the different markers that I had already put out there.
Nice. So you did like you said different standards or different skills or something were different colors, or maybe you could use like Khan Academy, things where they're watching videos are one color, and things where they're doing an activity like Desmos is another color, or things like that. Or and you said you could change the icons to be numbers. Maybe you could even make them like 1A, 1B, and 1C, and they have to choose one out of number one or something like that. Like you can get really creative for how you use that.
Yep, you could definitely do that.
Neat. Okay, so that's Google My Maps, and then Google Tour Builder would be is similar to the same thing. It's less. It's like Google My Maps. The map is the main part, and you're adding content to it. Google Tour Builder, it's like the map is an kind of like an ancillary part of the tool. You're building in stops that have to go in a certain order with a little more, like the map is kind of embedded into your other content. In general, you could do the same activity you're talking about doing here, except now it's actually going to take you in order through a line. And then I see now Google Earth has come out with the ability for you to create essentially tours like Google Tour Builder. I don't know that you'd want to do this in Google Earth, because that seems like you're using a really big tool to do a really, I don't want to say small problem, but the map is not the focal point. So it seems kind of silly to use Google Earth for it. Yeah. So my actual suggestion here, as I was thinking through this, kind of works off the same kind of ideas that you're talking about here with a choice board. And my thought was badging. So we've never talked about badging on the show that I can recall, but when we prepare these kids for these tests, we want them to feel some ownership over this process. Because currently what's happening is, at least I think in most situations, the teacher's feeling a lot of ownership over the scores the kids are getting, which I'm not going to get onto my soapbox about whether or not standardized tests are a good thing or a bad thing here. Right. I think there's two sides to the coin here for sure. Yep. But we need the kids to feel some ownership over these standards. So things like standards-based grading are helpful here. But what if each standard or set of skills is kind of a badge and the kids have to go through earning the badges? The order can be chosen by the teacher or by the students, but they have to focus on continuing to build up their badges. And then as they build up those badges, they become more confident that they're ready for the test. So then they walk into the test confident that they're going to rock that test. Like if there were 25 badges possible and they were able to get 24 of them before the test took place, then they're feeling really good about themselves. Yep. Or if they only had 10 badges to start with and they got themselves to 17, then they know that they're doing a lot better than they were doing a couple weeks ago. So they come into it with some confidence. And the way to earn those badges could be to answer some practice test questions. So if the teachers take those available test sets that are out there and say, these are the ones that relate to this badge, when you could solve these correctly, you've earned that badge. And then kind of like you did there, where you use things like Desmos or Khan Academy and videos to remediate the kids on the content or teach the kids the content, have some content available for them to learn how to get those badges.
Yep. And I love how you said that you can use the same practice questions, but to help towards earning some sort of badge or something. And that's something I deal with a lot of, is when helping teachers is like, well, I just got too much content to get to. Like, well, you can still use the same type of questions. I'm not telling you to throw out your content. I'm just trying to package it in a different way that will engage students, but also make the learning kind of stick, and they'll remember it.
Right. Yeah. We've been doing this as an educational society for over 100 years now. Like, we have done some things really well. Some of these questions are really well worded, and some of the curriculum maps are really well done. So we don't necessarily need to change those things. We might just need to change our delivery method, or the way the kids are representing their thinking, or the way the kids are being assessed. It doesn't mean that the things we're using, the questions we're using, or the content we're using, or the knowledge we're using, or the information we have has to change, right?
Yep, exactly.
And it makes it easier on the teacher too. If you already know these specific questions that you want the kids to answer, you don't have to change, reinvent the questions. You don't have to make new questions. You just might be using them in a new framework, which, what I'm suggesting is digital badging. And what you suggested, those questions could be in your choice board or in your My Maps choice board too.
Yep.
Yeah. So have you done any digital badging in the past?
I did with teachers whenever I was an instructional coach. And then now my district kind of does it district wide. Where teachers can earn badges for using different tech tools and stuff.
And what platform do you use to keep track of those badges and to show the badges?
We use Google Forms to track badges. Like, teachers would have to submit evidence that they were using these tools in class. And then we actually just printed out, little logos of the tech tool and we put them on the teacher's wall. Some schools, so even
you manually printed and did it there.
Yeah, and then some schools even did they created a board, so you could level up after you've earned so many badges to get a prize or something. So some schools would put those boards on every teacher's door, and then would tape or glue the logo of the tech tool that they were using as they would go and earn those badges. Yeah,
I actually did a similar thing with teachers in my district, where we were putting badges essentially outside of the teacher's door, so they knew, hey, if I'm trying to use Desmos, like you mentioned before, Desmos, I know that teacher has used it before, so maybe I could ask them how it went. I could ask them for some insight on it. So that's a nice format. But then even in the classroom, that Google Form strategy you're talking about there is a good way to do it, because you could even add in, if you know how to use forms, or if you use Flubru, or if you make them quizzes in forms, you could actually make it assess the kid and see if they did master that certain skill. And that lets the teacher then support the kids who need help earning some of those badges. The kids can go kind of assess themselves.
Yep.
Yeah.
One cool thing that happened too with the badging is even students would say to a teacher, like, hey, this teacher is using this tool in class and we really like it. You should check it out. And so it even got students on trying to get teachers more involved with using technology in the class. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. That's a really cool way to do it. So other ways to do it in the classroom with students, one is that Google Form strategy, which is a great strategy. And you could even set it to automatically email the kids the badge if they get it correct. That would take some legwork on the back end to program that in using something like AutoCrat, but you could potentially do that. Other ways to do badging is just to track it in a spreadsheet, track it on a doc, track it on slides, maybe where each kid has a slide and you add the badges as they master things. It could be paper-based. Also could be like something like on a Google site. If it's for teachers who use Schoology in their school, Schoology has a fantastic badging setup built into it. So that's a great badging tool. Those are the ones that jump off the page to me. If anybody else out there does badging and knows of other tools, I'd love to hear about some of those. So I like how both of us are going like, don't put the focus on preparing for the test. Put the focus on the way that you're going about doing it, giving the kids some choice, giving the kids some ownership over this process, rather than going like, okay, today we're going to review this standard. Today we're going to do these practice questions, things like that, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's dive into our second question. And this one I think you have ready. So what's your question here?
So my question is, how can educators utilize technology to work smarter and not harder?
That's yeah, go ahead.
A lot of times I hear teachers say, I want to do this, but that's just extra work. Mm-hmm. So let's utilize technology to our advantage as teachers.
Yeah, so we feel, as I talk on the show about trying these new things with educational technology, I don't ever want to make it seem like I'm not understanding of the fact that teachers have a hard job and they have a lot of work to do, and that we should make things as easy as possible for them, right? We should make it so that they're doing their best job for the kids, but we don't want them working insane hours in the evenings and things like that. We want to improve without, overexerting ourselves, right? We want teachers taking care of themselves. We want teachers feeling good and everything while still improving. So I like this question a lot. Work smarter, not harder. So I think there's a couple different ways we could do it. One of which is, I'm just going to point people back to a previous podcast episode. We had John Crippo on the show a while back, and I think I asked him pretty much the same question. And his answer was Edu Protocols, which he and Marlena Hebern wrote the book on, two of them actually. And that's a fantastic answer. So I'm not going to dive into Edu Protocols here, but I think that is something to look back to, is that John Crippo episode where he talks about that. And essentially an Edu Protocol is the format of the lesson or the activity is already built. You're just putting your new content into it. So then all you have to do on your teacher end is to figure out how your content fits into this pre-existing template that maybe you've already even used with your students. So your students are already used to it. So again, you're working smarter because you're using something that you know works, and you're not having to work harder because you're not having to reinvent the wheel to do the lesson. So that's one possible strategy you could use.
Nice.
And then another one that I want to suggest here, to share something new here. Back when I was teaching middle school math, me and you were math buddies here, both previous math teachers, right?
Yes, sir.
So back when I was teaching middle school math, I noticed in my second and third year that I'd be mid-lesson and I'd start to do an example problem or something like that. And I go I remember that last year this question was confusing for the kids, but I would realize it halfway through the question. Yeah. Or I would assign a homework assignment and the kids would come back super confused. And I go oh, that's right. This homework was confusing for the kids last year too. And so I realized that even though I was actively reflecting on how things were going, I was not retaining it until a year later, which who would remember that stuff for a year, right? So I started to actually write these things down. And then that way, the next year when I taught that lesson, I could look back and go oh, example 2 was really clunky. It didn't go well. Or this homework was really tricky. And so then I'd be able to make those revisions a year later based on my reflections from the previous year. So I actually used a spreadsheet, which I'm sure surprises no one that I was using a spreadsheet for this. And I had one column for the date, one column for the topic, one column maybe for the homework we did. And then the next column was my reflections. And I would just force myself at the end of every school day to reflect on every lesson, 2 or 3 sentences to tell myself next year what I should change about it. And then I can continue doing this continuous improvement cycle, but I was basing it off of my information from the previous year. So I was literally working smarter by not kind of having to dig up my past of what I thought back then. It was really right there, ready to go for me. So I didn't have to work harder to do it. I was working smarter. So what's your suggestion for this?
So my suggestion is Google Forms, and specifically, I guess some backstory. So in my role, I'm more of in the administrative role now with the RTI facilitator. And so I handle a lot of paperwork. And so our district had a form that teachers would have to fill out for every kid that failed their class, and then a separate form for every kid that failed 3 or more classes, whether theirs was part of that 3 or not.
Okay.
And so it was just a lot of paperwork. Teachers were having to do this all by hand, or, write this all out.
Right.
And then, so first thing I did was create a Google form of just a digital version, basically, of what the district had created.
Right.
And teachers like that because they could, copy and paste and do some things like that. But it was still taking a really long time to fill out these forms with information really that I can find from our data management system, like the student's name, ID number, their grade level and stuff like that. So what I started doing is using Google Form Prefilled links, which I haven't seen a whole lot of people using these, but it really saves a ton of time. One, It saves the person filling out the form time, but for me, the one that's collecting the forms, I get better data, more accurate data from the form.
So I'm going to guess before you dive into that, I'm going to guess that a lot of people don't know what you're talking about when you say pre-filled form links, because I've experienced the same thing where I love using pre-filled form links whenever possible, but I find that other people aren't aware of it. So could you give us kind of the tweet length version of what a pre-filled link is?
So basically, there's questions in the form that will already be answered for whoever's filling out the form. So in my case, where teachers are filling out the form, I already have the student's name, ID number, grade, the grade that they made in the class, what course it is. I have that all filled out for the teacher already. So whenever they open up the link, they just scroll down and answer the questions that I can't get from the data management system.
So you can go into the form and do that manually by clicking on, I think it's like edit and then get pre-filled form link, or it's something like that. And then you can go down through and select the certain student or teacher name or grade or whatever it might be, and then click for it. There's a button, I forget what it says, but click for it to generate the link, and then you can copy and paste that. But you're not manually doing that for each teacher and each student, right? How are you making it so that when teacher B wants to go in and reflect on student C, that it says the right teacher name and the right student name? How are you making that happen?
Right. So that's where I combine Google Forms with Google Sheets and do some spreadsheet magic. That way, I fill it out once and then I copy down the formula on a report that I ran. So for those kids that failed the class, that all the teachers need to fill this out. Well, one, that saves teachers times of not having to look up which kids failed their class. Right. I already provide them a list, but so I'll fill it out once and then just copy down the formula for everyone else. Right.
So you're using, you're probably using VLOOKUP to look up some student names and things like that, right?
Yes. Yep. So I'll do VLOOKUP from one spreadsheet to the other and then also you mentioned using Autocrat. So after teachers fill out the form, then I use Autocrat to send them the PDF that they actually have to print out and sign. Because that's one of our district's policies is we still have to have a signed copy of it.
Okay, so the teacher is still essentially creating a document they're going to print out, but they're doing it through a Google form, and it's just coming back to them as a document.
Right.
Yeah, a little less formatting work and stuff on the teacher's end. So I'm trying to think through in my mind what other formulas you'd be using there that people might want to look up. So there's VLOOKUP. You're probably using the ampersand operator in there.
Yes.
Yes, and then I think you have to use the substitute formula in order to fix the spaces in your answers, right?
I use the hyperlink formula.
Oh, okay. I've done it using the substitute formula, but does the hyperlink formula fix spaces?
Yes, it does.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. See, I've always used the substitute formula to do that. And some people are like, what the heck are they talking about right now out there? So what we'll do is we'll try to find something that we can link into the show notes that walks people through this process. It's it's doable, but it's a pretty intense formula usage here going on for people that want to try this stuff out, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it is. And it took me a while to get used to it, but after I got the hang of it, I can get it done personally really fast. And so it's just a huge time saver. And I actually just inserted a YouTube video that I made of how to do these Google Form pre-filled links.
Oh, perfect. So that'll be in the show notes for people to check out. So if you're interested in how to do these pre-filled links, that's a great way to do it. Yeah, I've used them a lot in situations pretty similar to what you're doing now. Like in a previous school district, I helped them build a system for disciplinary follow-ups and things like that, and consequences and things like that through Google Forms. And one particular thing was like when a teacher assigned a lunch detention, it would email the lunch detention monitor, but the link in there where the lunch detention monitor was supposed to fill in whether the kid had attended the detention or not was pre-filled, because we wanted to cut down on the excuses as much as we could. We wanted to cut as much work out for those people as we could. So it already had the student's name in there. It already had their lunch period in there. It already had their date in there. The the detention monitor, literally I just had to come in and click yes or no. So I was using pre-filled links to do all that. And that's just one example of a billion times I've used it. Today's super secret code is corner. 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 As in, Greg's cheesy joke about the corner was pretty lame. Corner. So go to eduducttape.com/certificate and type in the code corner. So I've totally cut you off on your system now. So you started with a paper-based form, and then you turned into a Google form, and then to cut down on work, you pre-filled links, so the teachers had to type in less. And then to help them get the printout, you used Autocrat to send them a PDF of the results. So what other things were part of the system you were doing there?
That's the gist of it right there.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to mention that how teachers could use this, because what I'm sharing right now is a lot of like administrative work.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I was in the classroom, I would have the same 3 questions on every single Google form that I did with students. I'd have their, really 4: first name, last name, ID number, and then class period at the high school level. And so that's information that the teacher could pre-fill.
Mm-hmm.
So that way, students aren't typing in the wrong ID number or misspelling their own last name, which happens.
Yeah.
But so that could save teachers some time too, once they get the hang of using these pre-filled links. And then, I guess one way how I share this out with teachers is on a spreadsheet. So there's different parts where I want to have everyone be able to edit, because I insert checkboxes. So I want teachers to checkbox the ones that they're filling out as they go. It also helps keep track too, especially if they had a lot of failures for that particular report card. But then I don't want them to edit the other information, like the student's name or ID number. So I'll protect those ranges.
Yeah.
So that way teachers can't edit that part out.
Yeah, that's important to do. And I've found that when I've done stuff like that in spreadsheets in the past, teachers are like, thank you for protecting that stuff, because I'm always nervous I'm going to mess something up that's important. And it really is important. Like if they accidentally type in the wrong cell, it might break your pre-filled links somehow.
Yep.
Yes, that's a good idea to do that to protect those ranges. And so the teacher has to be an editor to the spreadsheet, but you're limiting which cells they can edit, right?
Yeah, they don't have to be an editor. They could you could send it as view only, and they could still access the links. Yeah, the only reason why I make them an editor is so that way they can do the check boxes to help keep track. Because sometimes, we have some advanced classes, and so some of those teachers can have high failure rates sometimes, and so they have 30 or 40 of these to fill out of their 200 students, and so sometimes they can get lost on which of these links did I already click on.
Right.
So I like the check boxes that it helps keeps track as they go.
Yeah, you could even use some filters or things like that to hide them as soon as they checkbox them, right? So put less options up on the screen.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that system there. That's a good point too, that they don't have to be able to edit it to click on the links, but they have to be able to edit it to click that checkbox. And if you then don't want them editing other stuff, you could use those protect ranges. Now, one thing that listeners should know is if you set up cell protections, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Craig, if a person, teacher or otherwise, is an editor on a spreadsheet, they could technically go in and change which ranges are protected, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So in most situations, if you're protecting some ranges to keep people from editing them, those people probably don't know how to go back in and unprotect those ranges.
Right.
And in most situations, what you're doing here is just trying to avoid them accidentally changing something. They're not going to maliciously go in and change it anyhow. So, but just as a security thing that people should know, that even if you protect ranges, I believe any editor can go in and change those protections you put in there.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Very cool. So is there anything we missed on this work smarter, not harder question that you want to share?
That was my main point. Just another quick thing is I was finding myself looking up in my Google Drive for different documents or forms or anything. And so I was constantly just digging through and looking for the same thing, finding my classroom walkthrough form that I have to fill out, or looking up the PLC schedule. So I created a Google site that has some of the most common things that I was looking up in my Google form.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have 2. I created one for our entire admin team at my high school. And then, so it has our walkthrough form, our master schedule, our duty schedule and stuff like that. Then I created one for teachers where they have a Google form where they submit their lesson plans. There's a Google form for the attendance correction form or a tardy form, or the teacher's tutorial time we put all on a spreadsheet. So it was just kind of like my own little like hub.
Yeah.
So that way I wouldn't have to constantly look in my drive for the same things over and over again.
Yeah, it's nice in Google Drive that they're adding some features that lets us kind of do that. Like you can star the files, or now you could keep those workspaces or have them predicted forms and things like that up on the top. But then what about the things that, aren't in your drive and you have to get to? So kind of creating your own portal or your own hub is a good idea. I use the Toby add-on to do stuff like that. But the idea of creating like a nice looking site that then you can then share out, kind of within your network, within your building, within your team or whatever. So everybody has easy access to that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
A really cool way to organize those things so that, and those are the things we're talking about here. Work smarter, not harder, right? So keep doing the same processes that are good, but make them more efficient for you and save those minutes here and there so that it all kind of adds up in the end and you're able to do a little bit more.
Yep.
Well, Craig, this has been great talking about this stuff. So many good ideas for people to think about, to try to put to work in their own classrooms or their own schools. Everybody out there now is like, I've got to follow Craig and I've got to hear more of his ideas. So you can find him again on Twitter at Craig Klement, Klement, or at his blog, which is craigklement.wordpress.com. Craig, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks, Jake. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Great stuff, man. It was so great having Craig on the show today. I've got to tell you, a couple weeks actually after we recorded the episode, because spoiler alert, I don't record them live as you're driving in the car listening to them. But a couple weeks after I recorded this episode with Craig, I was down in Texas speaking at an event in Castleberry, Texas, which is relatively close to where Craig's at in the Dallas, Texas area. He works for Garland ISD, we talked about earlier. And Craig and I were able to hang out, and he is just a great dude. So I hope you will follow Craig and check out his blog and check out all of his work, because he is doing great things and he's a super nice guy. So I'm so glad to have had him on the show. You know who else is a super nice dude? You are. The Duct Tapers are. Let's hear what the Duct Tapers have to share for this week. Okay, so first up, I'd like to share something off the educational duct tape Flipgrid, which you could submit stuff to and connect with other duct tapers and get your voice heard on the podcast by going to flipgrid.com/edu duct tape or going to eduducttape.com and clicking on the Flipgrid link. But first up from the Flipgrid, we've got, I think, new listener, because it's the first we've heard from her. Regardless, glad to have her. Here is Adrienne Hudson.
Hi, Jake, and all you awesome duct tapers out there. It's Adrienne Hudson, all the way from Mississippi. That's Love, Teach, Rise. On Twitter, I am excited about the recent episode where we talked about brain science and how we really should just stop talking and start teaching. But as I was listening, I thought about a great resource that has helped me and the teachers that I work with brain science and just other ideas. And it's learningscientist.org. So it's an entire page of scientists like our awesome speaker for this week, but they are working together to come up with free resources that are research-based. There are even PowerPoints that help you to teach those specific strategies. They talked about spacing, they talk about retrieval practice, and they talk about other research-based ideas to help to make the learning very sticky and to help our students to really learn, not simply memorize. Also, they have a podcast, and it's called Learning Scientists Podcast. So reach out, take a look, and see if that's something that'll be helpful for you other duct tapers. Thank you so much for all the great work that you do, Jake.
Adrienne, thank you so much for that message. It's so nice to get messages from real people out there that are duct tapers. And I'm excited about that Learning Scientist link that she shared there. I had not heard of that, and I went and checked out their website and scratched the surface a little bit on what they have there, and it looks really cool. So I've added it to my list of stuff to check out in the future. So thank you very much for that share. I love getting new stuff shared through the Flipgrid as well. Up next, I normally share an Apple Podcast review, but guess what, guys? Hold on, let me look in my Apple Podcast box. Hello? Anything in there? In there? It's empty, guys. There's nothing in there. There's nothing to read. So Hopefully a fortnight from now, I'll have some reviews to share with you guys. I don't want to beg for them, but it really does help the show get to new ears, which we talked about the Adjacent Possible earlier, and that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to connect with more educators to bring in more perspectives to us, just like Adrian just shared that thing to me that I had never heard about before, and hopefully I'm sharing things with you guys, and Craig is sharing things with you guys that you've never heard before, and Apple Podcast reviews do help with that. I don't want to beg for them, but if you haven't left one, it really does help other educators discover the show, because it kind of bumps them up in the search results in Apple Podcasts as people go looking for new shows. Let's head over now out of Apple Podcasts over to Twitter, where there is plenty of stuff to sift through, because I haven't touched the hashtag EDU duct tape Twitter stuff for the podcast since, I don't know, December, and it is now, mid to late January. So let's see some favorite hashtag EDU duct tape tweets of the week. And when I say week, I really mean like month, because it's been a long time since I've shared any tweets here on the podcast, because we were off for the holidays, and then the podcast 2 weeks ago with Jared Cooney Horvath on it, I just did not have time to include any tweeters, so I had to look through like a bajillion tweets to figure out which ones to share on this episode, and these are the 5 that I was like, these are the ones I want to share, but it was hard narrowing them down to these 5. Up first, we've got at Abrams Tank 95, a local Ohio guy, Cleveland guy, tortured Cleveland sports fan like myself. Mike, I believe it is, says, tinkling with tech made me LOL during this week's hashtag EDU duct tape episode. I agree with at JakeMillerTech. Teachers are goofy. My level of goofy must be atmospheric, because I tried to imagine the learning from the bathroom scene in Bridesmaids. Classic movie, by the way, Mike. Second thought, learning can't describe those events. Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. I'm a little bit sad that I have to picture that scene again, but you're right. Tinkling with tech and potty PD and all the other weird metaphors and puns that us teachers come up with for that stuff is just goofy. But yeah, bridesmaid scene, maybe a little too far on that one. Up next, today's guest, Craig, said, by far, hashtag my fave episode of the hashtag EDU duct tape podcast was the one with at BuddyXO. That is Stacy Roshan. After hearing her interview with at JakeMillerTech, I was able to read her book. Simply a fantastic read, full of ideas, and puts the heart back into using hashtag EdTech, hashtag tech with heart. And thank you for that, Craig, and the shout out for that book. Lots of people have said how much they enjoyed Stacey's episode and her book. I myself have not read it yet. It is on my bookshelf right here behind me as I record, and it literally is up next on my book reading list. But I spend a lot more time recording podcasts than I spend reading, so I do hope to get into that one here pretty soon. Up next at Keisha, I believe it's Keisha, BioSpec. Keisha, I'm sorry if it's Kesha, but I assume it's Keisha because there's an I in there. I think it's Keisha. And I say spec, but it's really specialist, I'm sure. But spec is the way that word would be said phonetically. Anyhow, she said, catching up to at JakeMillerTech podcast, hashtag EDU duct tape, while having breakfast with my boys. As usual, they finished before me and moved on to dessert, hashtag teenage boys. Keisha, I'm not sure if I'm more excited about the fact that you're listening to my podcast while having breakfast, or having breakfast with your kids, or the fact that your kids get to have Oreos after they finish their breakfast. That is so amazing. There's no dessert after breakfast in my house. Have I been doing breakfast wrong for all of these years? Up next at Mrs. Payton First, who you're going to be hearing pretty soon in a mini episode, by the way. Missy said, just listen to this hashtag EDU duct tape mini episode with at Dawn Epps EDU. That episode, by the way, side note, came out, I think, the day after Christmas, maybe? Anyhow, Dawn was awesome. I met him at the Teach Better conference. Jumping back into Missy's tweet, she said, loved how he talked about having a growth mindset. What a great role model for his students and teachers. And then that emoji where it's the two hands with the thumbs touching and the arrows in between them, it means like, I'm really excited about this. I don't know what that emoji actually means. Emojis are weird, guys. Yeah, that wasn't Missy talking, that was me. But I wanted to share this one because that episode with Don was so awesome. Like, his perspective as an administrator was just so cool. If you haven't listened to it, do go back and listen to that one because, he's just an awesome principal. That's just really cool to hear his perspective from that episode. And up next, fellow podcaster at Brett Schreffler, host of the Planning Period podcast, said, wow, at JC Horvath, that's Jared, is amazing on the episode of the Educational Duct Tape podcast with @JakeMillerTech. There are so many actionable tips in here for helping students remember things better. Great. #EduDuct Duct Tape. And Brad, I agree. He was a rock star. And Brad, guess what? You're a rock star too, buddy. Thank you for that tweet and for sharing about that. Before we hear our new #EduDuct Tape tweeps of this episode, let's go one more time over to the #EduDuct Tape Flipgrid for an old friend of the show. And if you don't know this friend, then you need to go back and listen to some old episodes. Let's see who it is.
Hi, Jake. This is Ann Radefeld from Ohio. I was your guest on episode 2 of Educational Duct Tape, and I just wanted to let you know I am running errands right now. I'm super excited listening to Marcia Kish and you talk about all the different opportunities for blended learning out there, and I just wanted to share something that I thought was really valuable, a blended learning idea that my son's teacher last year in 3rd grade had. She is a teacher in the Kenston School District in Northeast Ohio, and she actually had her students create their own newsletter, and it was a paper newsletter, and the kids wrote the articles for the newspaper very similar to a school paper, and I thought it was fabulous. I loved reading it when they did it, and I really thought that they took ownership of what they were doing, of their learning, and they were still able to share. Even though it was a non-text solution, they were still able to share with people because it came home to us in paper, and I loved it. So I just wanted to share that idea. I hope everybody enjoyed Marcia Kish as much as I did. Thanks a lot, Jake. See you soon. Bye.
I'm laughing at the fact that Anne reminded me that she was the guest on episode 2 of the podcast. Anne is just awesome. I've got to tell you guys, if you don't follow her on Twitter, reach out to her and tell her, like, Anne Radefeld, you are awesome. She is @Anne Radefeld, and it's spelled just the way you think it would. And she was the guest on episode 2 because I couldn't think of anybody better to kick off this show with than my buddy Anne. She has just always been such a good sounding board for me on these ideas for the podcast and these ventures that I go on and my presentations and things like that. A great collaborator for presentations, and she just is an advocate for students and does great things in her school with her teachers, and just like, yeah, that's why Anne was the guest on episode 2. And you could hear that passion in that message there. And Anne, I love that idea about those newsletters made by students. And it does remind me of what Marcia and I were chatting about, which was, why are we the ones sharing about what's happening in our classrooms? Why don't we put the students in charge of that? And I love hearing that one of your kiddos' teachers is doing that in their classroom. And up next, let's jump over to Twitter. You hear Jake butcher the Twitter handles of some new #EduDuctTape tweeters of the week. First up, we've got a lot of letters here @BSGSCS Foster. Oh goodness, this is gonna be a rough list if I got to start off with BSGSCS Foster. Next, we've got @ChargerBlue, @Godinez M Godinez, @Jamie_Stark, @JJE-Mish5, @Karen Heinzen1, @Kat Goyette. By the way, Kat Goyette is awesome, and I hope to have her on the show at some point in the future. Up next is @LoveTeachRise, which I believe is Adrian, who we heard earlier, @Ms. Franks JJE, @Principled Lady, not principal like principal, principled like, I don't know, follows rules maybe, I don't know, @Prowlander. Is that like a sequel to the Highlander? This is the Prowlander. @Aradene915, which is Rochelle Dene Poth, who was in a mini episode a couple weeks ago. @Rise Vision, @Shapegrams, the awesome project from Tony Vincent. @Sheldon Akins, guest from episode 33-ish. @Sunny Magana. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I know his work, and he's as a T3 framework, so I appreciate him participating in our chat last week. @Teach from Ridge, which is Nate and Angie Ridgway, who I hope to have on the show in the future. @Teach Strickland. And finally, our mini episode guest from last week, Vambakitas A, @Vambakitas A. AJ was awesome on the mini episode last week. If you haven't listened to it, go back and do that. And that does it for episode 1,046,000,046, or whatever number we are on right now of the Educational Duct Tape podcast. I appreciate you so much for listening in. I appreciate you so much for the fact that an hour and 3.5 minutes into the show, you are still here listening. You are so awesome. You are doing awesome things for the educators you work with. You are doing awesome things for the students that you work with. You are doing awesome things for the communities that you work with. I appreciate you. I hope they appreciate you. I hope you know, even if they're not telling you, that they do appreciate you. And I am so glad that you are a duct taper. I am so glad that you're a part of the Adjacent Possible. I appreciate all of the things you do to connect with the show. I hope that you'll participate in the chat next week. I hope that you'll turn in for a mini episode next week. And I hope that a fortnight from now, you will be back listening to the very next episode of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Thank you. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you in a fortnight.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please visit eduducttape.com to join the discussion, share possible topics, inquire about being a guest, or contact Jake. And remember, duct is spelled with a T, not a quack quack K.